Upon his arrival at Los Angeles airport that afternoon, Suga of BTS stepped off a private jet with a calm demeanor. Wearing a dark jacket, headphones resting around his neck, and sunglasses that concealed most of his facial expression. Yet his body language suggested a mix of exhaustion and readiness to embrace a different atmosphere after spending some time in South Korea, and it was clear this trip was not related to official work or scheduled appearances, but leaned more toward personal rest and recuperation, as there were no HYBE staff members or representatives from his agency present. An uncommon sight given the usual protocol for international travels by high-profile artists. Instead, what drew attention was the appearance of two adult women who walked directly toward him moments after he exited the aircraft, one dressed in a soft-toned casual outfit with a cream jacket, while the other appeared more relaxed in a loose sweater and dark trousers, both approaching with a sense of ease, and Suga responded with a small, rare smile, walking toward them lightly and naturally, displaying a comfort and familiarity that signaled a personal connection, according to sources near the private jet parking area. The two women were not part of any professional team or staff, but rather individuals not seen publicly with Suga in a very long time, and their presence seemed to evoke a subtle joy in his demeanor, evidenced by a brief but genuine hug exchanged with one of them and casual gestures as they walked together toward a vehicle waiting beside the hangar. Flight records and airport staff confirmed that this arrival had not been announced publicly and was not part of HYBE's official itinerary, further reinforcing the impression that this trip was purely personal in nature. Also supported by Suga's minimal luggage, a medium-sized suitcase and a small backpack carried by himself, there were no entourages, no official security, and notably, no manager or artist coordinator. Typically accompanying his movements, what caught more attention was the natural rapport between the three, reflected in subtle nonverbal communication as they made their way to the SUV. One of the women even casually took over the suitcase from Suga without hesitation, while the other opened the rear door of the black SUV already prepared, letting him take the middle seat before joining him inside. From the way they interacted, it was evident that this wasn't their first meeting, but also not a frequent occurrence recently, as their body language showed the kind of familiarity that suggested a reunion after a considerable time apart. One eyewitness in the private terminal area mentioned that Suga appeared more at ease than usual, moving without urgency, unlike during work-related travel, and that subtle shift in pace suggested a moment of pause in the otherwise tightly scheduled life of a global artist. Their vehicle exited the private terminal route without heavy escort, heading west into the city, likely toward a private residence or prearranged resting spot, with no media notification and no official posts from either his personal or company accounts. This move subtly reflected another dimension of Suga, one that values small, meaningful human moments far from the public eye, especially those involving people from his inner circle not seen for some time. This quiet yet meaningful encounter, though unnoticed by the broader media, served as a poignant reminder that, amidst the intensity of the entertainment world, there remains space protected by an artist like Suga for personal, emotional, and deeply human connections, a reality that exists behind the global fame, rarely seen but always present in the quieter chapters of his journey. As the vehicle carrying Suga and the two women left the private terminal and merged into the traffic of western Los Angeles, there was no visible attempt to conceal their route or apply excessive discretion, a gesture that subtly suggested a level of comfort with the situation and possibly a confidence that the meeting would not attract unwanted attention. The car, a black SUV with tinted windows, moved steadily through the early evening streets, passing familiar city blocks and heading toward what appeared to be a quiet residential area, far from the entertainment districts or popular tourist zones often associated with celebrity activity. And once they arrived at a modern but modest two-story house with ivy crawling along the front fence and a driveway shaded by trees, the vehicle parked slowly before the three passengers exited in no particular hurry. Suga stepped out first, adjusting his hoodie slightly as he looked around, taking in the surrounding atmosphere with the kind of familiarity that hinted he had been there before, perhaps not recently, but with enough emotional association to walk up the steps without hesitation. The two women followed close behind, one carrying a cloth tote bag, while the other pulled out what looked like a folded shopping list or note, possibly for groceries or supplies, suggesting they were planning a domestic stay rather than a hotel-based rest. And as they entered the house, Suga held the door for both of them, an understated gesture that again reflected how natural the dynamic between them felt. Inside, The lights turned on slowly as if no one had stayed there for a while, but the place looked well-maintained, clean, and personalized with a few plants near the window and simple framed photos on the shelf. Though none appeared to be recent, the group stayed inside for some time, with curtains drawn and no deliveries or signs of assistance arriving, reinforcing the impression that the time being spent here was meant to be uninterrupted and private. Later in the evening, around 7:30 p.m., one of the women left the house briefly, walking on foot to a nearby deli a few blocks away, where she picked up a few essentials: fresh bread, 2 containers of salad, and what appeared to be a bottle of orange juice and a small package of herbal tea. She returned without incident, greeted again at the door by Suga, who accepted one of the bags and helped carry it inside. Neighbors in the area, when asked, shared that the house had been quiet for months but occasionally visited by someone who looked like a friend of the family. Though they could not confirm who the owner was, what stood out was that none of the neighbors seemed aware that a global pop star was in their midst, and that further confirmed that Suga's presence there was neither announced nor noticed beyond the few who recognized him in passing. Inside the house, lights in the kitchen and living room stayed on until about 10 p.m., and although there was no loud music or signs of a party, the subtle movement of shadows and the occasional clink of dishes suggested a shared meal had taken place, likely in a casual and comfortable setting, the kind of evening spent catching up and being present without the distraction of phones or obligations. Suga's phone had not shown any activity on social media, and HYBE had made no mention of his location, lending credibility to the idea that this was entirely a personal break, possibly planned independently and deliberately outside his professional schedule. The presence of the two women, whose identities remain unconfirmed, but are believed to be long-time personal acquaintances, perhaps childhood friends or family-related individuals, continues to shape the narrative of this trip as one deeply grounded in reconnection, rest, and familiarity, not extravagance or luxury. And what makes this moment all the more interesting is how it contrasts with the usual high-profile movements of celebrities in Los Angeles, where luxury cars, stylists, or paparazzi are often involved, while Suga's stay so far had resembled more of a quiet visit to trusted company in a familiar home, possibly somewhere he had once spent time during an earlier visit to the city, or perhaps a place belonging to someone meaningful in his private life. In either case, the absence of spectacle and the simplicity of the evening set a tone that many fans rarely get to see. A version of Suga that exists beyond stages and spotlight, someone who values stillness, memory, and connection, and if anything, this reinforces why he continues to draw admiration not only as an artist but as a person capable of balancing public persona with deeply private choices that reflect authenticity. The following morning in Los Angeles began quietly, with the house where Suga was staying showing minimal signs of activity from the outside, no unusual movements, no vehicles coming or going, and no increased attention from fans or media, suggesting that the privacy of the visit had been successfully preserved overnight. Around 8:45 a.m., the front window curtain shifted slightly, and shortly after, Suga stepped out onto the small front porch with a ceramic mug in his hand, wearing the same hoodie from the previous day layered over a light shirt, accompanied by one of the women from the day before who joined him with a second cup. They stood there for a few minutes, talking quietly while observing the stillness of the neighborhood, which remained unaware of who they were. The street was mostly empty except for a few residents walking dogs or heading out for morning errands, and the entire scene was remarkably ordinary, reinforcing the sense that this visit was not for spectacle, but for grounding and personal renewal. After finishing their drinks, they both returned inside, and it wasn't until about an hour later that the second woman emerged briefly to bring in a grocery delivery left near the front gate, which contained more basic essentials: fresh fruit, bottled water, oat milk, and some dry goods, all of which were consistent with a simple, home-based stay rather than any kind of luxury trip. By midday, the group remained indoors, though by 1 p.m. a black sedan arrived discreetly, not a luxury model but a practical car commonly used by locals, from which a man in his late 30s stepped out carrying a brown case. He rang the doorbell and was greeted by Suga himself, who led him inside without delay, and according to someone nearby who observed the exchange from across the street, the man stayed for about an hour and left alone, speculated to be a massage therapist or private wellness practitioner, which would align with Suga's known preference for physical therapy and quiet self-care during his off days. After the visit, the day continued without interruption, and by late afternoon the three individuals inside the house had re-emerged, this time dressed casually but ready for an outing. Suga wore a cap and sunglasses, along with a muted brown jacket, and they walked out together without assistance toward a nearby cafe just 5 blocks away, choosing to walk rather than call a car, perhaps because the distance was short or because they preferred the normalcy of moving freely in a city where they could blend in more easily. At the cafe, a small locally run establishment with outdoor seating, the trio sat at a shaded corner table and spent nearly an hour chatting over coffee and pastries, occasionally smiling and glancing at each other, immersed in a relaxed rhythm that looked completely disconnected from the typical pace of the entertainment industry. Other patrons at the cafe either didn't recognize Suga or chose not to react, and the staff treated the group no differently than any other customer, further confirming that this trip was achieving its apparent goal of offering him space to simply exist without performance or attention. After they finished their orders, the 3 walked slowly back to the house, stopping briefly at a park bench nearby before continuing on foot. Their interactions remained consistent, supportive, light, and comfortable, never rushed or forced. Later that evening, around 6:30 p.m., the house lights were on again, and from the slight glow visible through the blinds, it appeared they spent the evening inside once more, possibly preparing dinner or watching a film together. No outside visitors arrived, no delivery vehicles returned, and nothing about the evening seemed out of routine. It was clear that the presence of these 2 women was not part of any professional duty but rather grounded in a long-standing personal relationship, and the way they occupied the same space with Suga gave the impression of mutual trust and shared history, one that did not require explanation, display, or performance. By 10 p.m. the house was again quiet, all lights off except for a dim one in what seemed to be a study or den area near the back, and as the neighborhood settled into sleep, it became increasingly clear that this chapter in Suga's life, while not extraordinary by celebrity standards, offered a glimpse into the quieter, more human aspects of his personal world, the kind of moments not documented on social media or seen on stage, but the ones that perhaps matter most to those who live them. And while there was no statement from HYBE and no indication of how long he would remain in Los Angeles, the consistency and intention behind his actions during these 2 days suggested that his priority during this stay was simple: reconnect with people who matter to him, rest in a familiar environment, and momentarily disengage from the machinery of fame in favor of something more personal, present, and real. To be why the morning of the 3rd day in Los Angeles, the calm rhythm of Suga's personal time remained uninterrupted, and while the house where he had been staying with the 2 women continued to show minimal external activity, there was a noticeable shift around 9:15 a.m. when a different black SUV, this time a newer model, pulled up quietly in front of the residence. Though it didn't bear any agency branding or signs of official transportation, it did suggest that a planned outing was approaching. Shortly after, all 3 individuals stepped out of the house dressed comfortably but more prepared for a longer day outdoors. Suga wore a plain white t-shirt under a zippered hoodie, paired with beige pants and sneakers, while the 2 women opted for layered casual outfits, one of them carrying a medium-sized shoulder bag and a portable camera slung casually across her chest. Before entering the vehicle, they briefly checked the surroundings, not out of suspicion but more from routine mindfulness, and once settled inside, the car drove off slowly toward the northern part of the city, eventually making its way into the Santa Monica area, where the group stopped briefly at a small breakfast spot known for its discreet atmosphere and minimalist menu. Witnesses at the location described the visit as quiet and uneventful, with the group seated at a back table by a window, engaged in light conversation and clearly enjoying each other's company. The staff at the restaurant served them without fanfare, and there was no sign of bodyguards or handlers nearby. After finishing their meal, the group proceeded to take a walk near the beach promenade, not directly on the sand but along the quieter pedestrian path lined with small trees and benches, a location often chosen by locals seeking reflection or space away from city noise. Suga walked between the 2 women, occasionally pointing at something or smiling softly as they passed small storefronts, dog walkers, and cyclists who paid little to no attention to their presence. This was not the kind of celebrity moment engineered for public attention or media coverage. It was, instead, a rare instance where someone of Suga's status moved through a public space with the ease of someone no longer burdened by the expectations of constant visibility. The group continued their walk for nearly an hour before returning to the vehicle and heading inland toward a lesser-known cultural center where a quiet art exhibit was being held, one focused on contemporary Korean-American artists. A visit that likely held personal significance given Suga's consistent appreciation for visual arts and cultural preservation. They entered the venue without attracting attention and spent just under an hour inside, after which they left with a small printed program and no purchases, further supporting the impression that the visit was thoughtful and centered on shared appreciation rather than any public statement or appearance. From there, the vehicle drove them back to the house, arriving just after 3 p.m., and for the remainder of the day, no further movements were recorded, only a brief moment around sunset when one of the women stepped out to water a few plants by the front yard. By dusk, the house was again quiet, its occupants settled inside, and what stood out most about this entire series of days was how uneventful it had been from a traditional entertainment perspective. Yet, how emotionally significant it seemed to be from a human standpoint. There were no high-profile events, no flash photography, no stylists or label teams, only the steady presence of Suga and two individuals from his personal life who had clearly come to mean something important to him. The simplicity of shared routines, walking, eating, talking, resting, had created a space that likely offered more genuine restoration than any luxury retreat or promotional break could provide. And although the identities of the two women were never officially confirmed, their relationship with him, characterized by familiarity, comfort, and mutual respect, stood in quiet contrast to the hyper-public narratives often surrounding celebrity friendships and partnerships. This trip, whether planned for a few more days or concluded at this point, left no dramatic mark in the media but instead etched a small, meaningful footprint in the rhythm of Suga's private life, reflecting a choice to prioritize stillness, reflection, and personal connection in a world that rarely allows such pauses. And while fans may not see these moments documented or explained, they remain a crucial part of what allows an artist like Suga to remain grounded, thoughtful, and in touch with the life that exists beyond the music and the fame. And it is in these subtle chapters, unseen, unannounced, and undisturbed, that the human behind the artist continues to grow in ways that require no applause, only space, time, and trust.